H. At Thanksgiving, my parents gave every grandchild dessert in cash envelopes except my son. My mother smiled and said, he didn't earn it. When I left without a scene, my parents tried to take my house and report me as unstable. I responded once, H. That was the ending, but the beginning was quieter. My name is Shawn. I am in my late 30s, and for years, H. I believed that if I made my life small enough, orderly enough, and independent enough, I could avoid the chaos. H. I worked in operations for a mid-sized company. The work was steady, predictable, and, crucially, it stayed at work. H. I lived a quiet life with my son, Tucker, who was 9. We were a unit. I was divorced, and there was no drama there. H. The chaos always came from the same source, my family. My parents were Valerie and Jack. My siblings were Sophie and Peter. Peter was fine. He mostly stayed out of the way. Sophie, though, was the problem, or perhaps the symptom. She was the golden child, the one always needing help, divorced, buried in debt, and constantly between plans. Rent gaps, school expenses, H, emergencies that seemed to surface every few months. Valerie and Jack covered it. Always. And because they covered it, they felt entitled to manage everyone else, too. I hadn't asked them for money in years. That independence was the source of my tension with them. It meant I was outside their sphere of influence. They didn't like that. They preferred the leash of obligation. Thanksgiving this year was at their house, the same setup as always. Familiar, H. Slightly suffocating. Tucker and I showed up early, mostly because Tucker wanted to help. H. He had spent most of the week focused on one task making cranberry sauce from scratch, not canned. He looked up recipes. H argued with me about the sugar levels and took the whole process way too seriously. He was profoundly proud of it. We walked in. H, the dish covered in foil, still warm. Tucker went straight to Valerie and told her he made it himself. She offered a tight, H, polite smile, nodded, said, "That's nice," and set it on the counter. The kitchen was already filling with the thick, warm smell of roasting poultry, sage, and hidden anxieties. A little later, when people started milling around, I noticed the dish was gone. I hadn't seen exactly what happened. I just registered its absence. When dinner was finally served, H, there was a bowl of canned cranberry sauce on the table, still showing the perfect ridges from the can. Tucker noticed. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me, then back at the table. He was 9 years old, H, and he already understood the concept of replacement. I told myself to let it go. I always did. Sophie showed up late, as was her style. Her 2 kids charging ahead of her, yelling through the house, "Esh!" One of them clipped a small table near the entry and sent a framed photo sliding across the floor. The glass cracked with a sharp, sickening sound. Valerie gasped. Sophie muttered, "Oh my God," without any real concern. Jack simply laughed and said, "Shh. Kids will be kids," before picking up the frame and leaning it against the wall. No harm, no foul, no consequence. The H. Tucker was on the sofa with his handheld game, the volume deliberately muted, just keeping busy and trying to be invisible. H. Valerie noticed him right away and snapped that he was being antisocial. She demanded to know why he couldn't go play with his cousins. She told him it was rude to sit there like that when family was around. H. I pointed out that he had tried earlier and got brushed off. Valerie told me that wasn't the point. The point was he should try harder. Tucker turned the game off and put it in his bag without a word, retreating into himself. H. Dinner prep continued. Sophie complained about traffic, about her ex, about how expensive everything was getting. H. Valerie hovered over her like a nurse tending to a fragile patient. Jack, my father kept checking his phone. Every so often, H. Sophie leaned in and whispered something to him. I could not hear it, but I saw the change in Jack's face each time tight. Focused, H. Calculating. At one point, he glanced at me. Not annoyed, not neutral, but calculating like he was lining something up in his head. When we finally sat down, Tucker helped set the napkins. Valerie corrected how he folded them. H. Sophie's kids ran through the kitchen again and knocked into a chair. No comment. H. Tucker reached for a spoon and Valerie told him to wash his hands again even though he had just done so. Small stuff. It always was. H. 1,000 tiny cuts designed to reinforce who belonged and who didn't. Then the moment arrived. Dinner was wrapped. H. Valerie stood and announced dessert. Cheesecake. Tucker perked up. It was his favorite. The one thing Valerie made every year that he loved. Valerie brought out the plates. She handed the first, a big slice with extra topping, to Sophie's youngest. The kid didn't say thank you. The second plate went to Sophie's other kid, H. Same size, same smile. They didn't thank her either. Jack reminded them to say thank you. No one corrected them when they didn't. H. Tucker stood up from his chair, holding his empty plate, waiting patiently with a small, hopeful smile. Valerie didn't look at him. H. She turned back to the counter and picked up a small stack of white envelopes. She handed one to Sophie's youngest. Cash spilled out. H. The second envelope went to the second kid. More cash. They compared amounts out loud, one complaining the other got more. H. Valerie laughed and said it would all even out. Tucker was still standing there with his empty plate. Valerie finally looked at him. H. You didn't earn dessert tonight. The room went completely silent. She added, calmly, H. Because of how you acted? Tucker lowered his plate slightly. Then Valerie handed him an envelope. He looked confused but still mumbled, Thank you. He opened it carefully. Inside was a small folded piece of paper. He unfolded it. Shh. I could not read all of it, but I caught the keywords attitude, learning gratitude, be more present. Sophie's kids noticed. Aish. One laughed and said, You didn't get anything. Valerie smiled, a measured, purposeful smile, and said, H. Maybe next time you'll be more present, Tucker. Then she turned back to Sophie's kids and offered them seconds. H. Tucker folded the note back up and put it inside the empty envelope. His face went blank. Not angry, not sad, just flat. H. He whispered to me, It's okay. That was it. That was the line. I stood up. I took the envelope from Tucker's hands. H. Tore it clean in half and set the two pieces on the table next to the cheesecake. I didn't raise my voice. H. I didn't say anything dramatic. I helped Tucker into his coat. Valerie said my name like she wanted to stop me, but Jack stayed silent. H. We walked out. We were 5 minutes down the road when my phone buzzed. It was Jack. You made your mother cry? H. Fix this by tomorrow or we talk about the mortgage. The calm, calculated threat made the back of my neck prickle with ice. H. The threat was not a bluff. Years ago, when I bought my house, Jack had insisted on helping H, setting up a small second mortgage in his name. It kept his name tied to my house and gave him a button he could press whenever I failed to fall in line. I didn't respond. I just kept driving. That mortgage, the last tether, had to go. The threat from Jack was a cold compress on my simmering rage. It was not a wild, shouted fury. It was a methodical, legal maneuver. Fix this by tomorrow or we talk about the mortgage. That text, waiting when I pulled up to my driveway, H, was exactly what I had spent my adult life trying to avoid, an involuntary reaction to their pressure. I ignored it. H, there was no apology to give, and certainly nothing to fix. H, the only thing that needed fixing was the vulnerability in my own life that they were exploiting. The next morning, the day after Thanksgiving, was quiet in the house. Tucker was subdued but calm. He didn't ask about the note or the cheesecake. The H, we spoke about school, about the football game playing on the television, about everything except the events of the previous day. H. His silence was the loudest indictment of my parents' actions. It reinforced the only path forward. I went to my office and closed the door. My goal was simple and surgical: eliminate the leverage. I called my bank. H. Because Jack's loan was a recorded second mortgage, and not just cash under the table, I had to go through them. H. The process was sterile, professional, and entirely detached from the messy family emotion that had prompted it. The loan officer, H, whose name I already forget, was perfectly efficient. H, you're looking to settle the outstanding balance on the second position held by Jack and Valerie Marshall? She asked. H, her voice flat and administrative. Yes, in full. Today, I confirmed. I explained that I had the funds prepared. It was a substantial amount. A little over $25,000, which I had saved for a rainy day and unexpected life crisis. H. Paying it off in one move would sting, leaving my accounts significantly depleted. But it wouldn't ruin me. H. Was a cost of doing business. It was the necessary payment to ensure that I would never again be held hostage by a holiday. The officer explained the logistics. Because the loan was structured as a recorded lien, it required a formal payoff statement and a transfer. Mr. Marshall will be notified when the payment is accepted and the release of lien is processed. She confirmed. H. Hay will be receiving documentation as the account holder. Good, I said. The H. The thought of Jack opening a document that showed his weapon had been silently confiscated gave me a sense of deep, cold satisfaction. H. The morning was a blur of clicking and signing documents on my screen. I moved money, confirmed statements, H, and answered questions about the source of the funds. By early afternoon, the payment was executed. Jack's loan was paid in full. H. The debt was settled. The legal and financial cord was severed. The bank sent me a digital confirmation receipt immediately. I opened the file. It was a standard PDF, stamped and dated, stating the loan balance was zero. H. I forwarded that single PDF to Jack's email address. The body of the email contained one word: typed in lowercase. Done. No apology. No explanation. No follow-up. Just the finality of the receipt and the single, definitive word, Esh. I didn't hear back immediately. The silence felt heavy, but I knew the fight wasn't over. My experience taught me that when my parents' primary weapon was taken, they wouldn't retreat. They would simply look for another. My current theory was that I just needed to maintain distance and let the silence win. So, I began a meticulous process of cleaning house. Paying off the loan meant pulling together every piece of paperwork tied to my finances. Statements, old emails, closing documents, anything with my name on it that might be sitting outside my control. I wanted no thread, no loose end, no favor that could be used against me later. I was determined to achieve financial sterilization. I started digging through old email threads, some of which I hadn't opened in years. I searched for keywords like title, deed, and joint account. Buried in a chain from 5 years ago was a vague message about the beach house. The beach house. I had almost forgotten about it. Years back, Valerie and Jack had bought it. It was supposed to be a family asset, though ownership wasn't equal. Peter had kicked in some cash, but didn't want his name on the deed. Sophie hadn't contributed a dime, but she was told the house was ultimately for the kids and she would be taken care of. However, the had put in a chunk up front, a sizable amount, and at the time they insisted on adding my name as a temporary co-owner just to ease the initial financing. They had promised to clean it up later. They never did. I hadn't thought about it much since. I wasn't involved in managing it or using it. It was just an anchor I thought was buried deep. The email thread mentioned a title update, but nothing specific. It was a vague back and forth chain about eventually cleaning up the title. At the time, I had written it off as typical paperwork talk and forgot about it. Now, seeing it again, my professional eye for detail was picked. Given Jack's willingness to use financial leverage, I had to check. It was just due diligence. I had to know. I pulled the county records for the property. It only took a few minutes of searching the public database. What I found was a recently filed quitclaim deed. My eyes scanned the document. A quitclaim deed, formally transferring ownership. My name was removed. My signature was on it. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen for a long time. The office was quiet. I understood exactly what I was seeing. The signature looked like mine at a first. Quick glance. The same slant. The familiar last name loop. But it was not mine. I knew every version of my signature, every idiosyncrasy. This was a forgery. A professional one, but absolutely not mine. They hadn't told me. They hadn't asked. They hadn't even tried to justify it. I checked the filing date. It was recent. Just days after Thanksgiving. After the mortgage threat had failed. They had been sitting on the idea for a while. And the failure of their primary leverage forced them to pull the trigger on the secondary plan. The deed was still pending final processing. The reason clicked into place fast. Sophie, they weren't trying to tidy paperwork. They were trying to free up an asset. The beach house wasn't a symbol. It was money sitting still. Money they could sell. borrow against, or rent out. Money Sophie desperately needed. I replayed the whole scene from Thanksgiving. Sophie whispering to Jack, H. His calculating gaze at me afterward, the sudden urgency. It was all about money. And somehow, I was always the solution they circled. H. I downloaded everything, screenshots, PDFs, metadata. I saved copies in 3 separate, secured digital locations. H. I was done being reactive. I was done running. They thought they had won this piece of the board without a fight. H. I let them keep believing it. I didn't feel angry. I felt perfectly clear. They had crossed the line quietly, legally, criminally. H. And now I had everything I needed to fight back with a force they could never predict. H. I would not give them the emotional reaction they craved. I would give them consequence. The quiet was unnerving. H. After I sent the one-word email confirming the mortgage payoff, Jack went silent. Valerie went silent. Sophie made no contact. H. This wasn't the usual post-holiday cold shoulder. This was the silence of people assessing damage. They thought I was beaten. Esh. Or perhaps they believed I hadn't looked closely at the paperwork. They believed the severed mortgage was the end of my resistance. They were wrong. For the next few days, I lived my life, acting out my Lee. Distance equals safety. I went to work. I packed Tucker's lunches. I helped him with his 4th grade math homework, painstakingly going over fractions. Tucker was back to his usual self, focused and quiet. Though I noticed he was now meticulous about helping in the kitchen, H. carefully setting every dish down as if expecting an invisible critique. But beneath my outward calm, H. I was operating on a different plane. My mind was consumed by the forged quitclaim deed. H. I had found the document with my signature removed and saved copies of the evidence in 3 secured locations. I felt the cold. H. Hard clarity of someone who has been personally and legally violated. It wasn't about the money anymore. The H. It was about defining the moral character of the people who raised me. They hadn't just used leverage, they had committed a crime, and worse, they had assumed I wouldn't notice or wouldn't dare fight back. I kept pulling records. H. I checked past filings associated with the beach house property. I looked at the notary information attached to the fraudulent deed. H. I cross-referenced the dates and locations. I found that the notary was a friend of Jack's. H. Someone who had signed documents for him before, making it clear this was a planned internal operation. I didn't confront them. H. If I had called Jack then, he would have instantly lied. Valerie would have started crying, manufacturing guilt and confusion. H. Sophie would have played the victim, pretending the whole thing was an innocent misunderstanding about just trying to help the family. They would have done everything to pressure me into signing the new, clean deed to fix their mistake. I wanted none of that drama. I needed to move from being the reactive son to the strategic antagonist. I needed facts. I needed Peter. My brother, Peter, was the middle child, the perpetual peacemaker. H. He was 7 years older than me and had always navigated our parents' emotional minefield by taking the path of least resistance. He rarely took a side, opting instead for genial neutrality and quiet compliance. He was the definition of the smooth over. I waited until Tuesday afternoon. Tucker was in his room working on a model airplane. The house was calm. H. I was making an early dinner when the knock came. It wasn't a casual tap. It was firm, official, and loud. The kind of knock that carries the weight of authority. When I opened the door, there were two people standing there. H. A uniformed police officer and a woman who introduced herself as a social worker. "Are you Shawn Marshall?" "And does Tucker Marshall live here?" the officer asked, his voice low and serious. My heart didn't race, it stopped. Aish. The cold clarity of the previous days hardened instantly into dread. I knew with absolute certainty who had sent them. Itch. The social worker explained they were there to do a welfare check. H. An anonymous report came in expressing concern about your stability, she said, looking down at her notepad. H. The caller alleged heavy drinking, neglect, and an unsafe home environment. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. H. I simply stepped aside and said, "Please, come in." Arguing would only reinforce the idea that I had something to hide. H. The house was thankfully spotless. Not staged, just normal. Tucker's backpack was by the door. H. His math homework still on the kitchen table where he'd been working that morning, the fridge full of real food. The officer looked around the living room and kitchen. The social worker took notes, her expression carefully neutral. They asked Tucker a few questions in front of me, then asked if they could speak to him alone in his room. I agreed immediately. While they were talking, I stood in the kitchen, feeling a suffocating pressure. This wasn't financial manipulation anymore. The H. This was an attack on the one thing that defined me, the one thing I protected my son. H. They were using the weight of the state to threaten my custody, my freedom, and my stability. H. This was the moment they moved from being simply toxic family to active destroyers. Tucker, always perceptive, was clearly nervous. H. His voice was quieter than usual when he came back out. He kept glancing at me, checking to see if he had done something wrong. Or if it had done something wrong. The officer eventually came back into the living room and said, "Everything looks fine here, Mr. Marshall." The social worker nodded, thanked me, and handed me a card with a report number. They said they would close the file. H. The whole thing took maybe 20 minutes. It felt like an eternity. After the door closed, Tucker stood at the kitchen table and stared at his math sheet, his pencil forgotten. "Did I do something wrong?" he whispered. H. His voice thin. "No, absolutely not," I told him, kneeling down to meet his eyes. "You did everything exactly right. They were wrong to come here, not you. Are they coming back?" "No," I said, though I felt anything but convinced. Ash. That night after Tucker went to bed, H. I waited until his television was turned on, a signal he was settled, and then I called the non-emergency number on the card. H. I gave them the report number and asked for a copy for my records. The official version, including the originating phone number. H. I knew I wouldn't need to ask who the caller was, but I wanted the evidence formalized, dated, and logged. I saved the welfare report with the forged deed. I had severed the financial tie. Now, they had severed the moral one. The time for silence was over. It was time to call Peter. I waited until Tucker was asleep. I sat at my kitchen table. The envelope containing the social worker's card and the report number resting next to my phone. I stared at the phone for 15 minutes, steeling myself, not because I was afraid of confrontation, but because I was afraid of the denial that was sure to follow. I was afraid of Peter's predictable reaction. Finally, I called my brother. Peter answered on the second ring, his voice slightly muffled. Probably distracted by his own kids or the television. Hey, Shawn. Everything okay? Thanksgiving was a little intense. How? He asked, already sliding into his role as the great smoother over. No, Peter. Everything is not okay, I said. I kept my voice flat, professional, stripping it of emotion. I needed to present facts, not feelings. I had a welfare check at my house this afternoon. A police officer and a social worker. Someone filed an anonymous report alleging heavy drinking and neglect of Tucker. Peter went completely quiet. The background noise in his house, a television, maybe a child giggling, vanished.
Wait, what? Are you serious?
Who the hell would do that? I have my guess, I told him. But I have proof of something else first. I need you to look at a couple of things. I'm sending them to your email now. I forwarded him the digital copy of the fraudulent quitclaim deed for the beach house. I included the signature page and the filing date, which clearly showed it was filed after Thanksgiving. I waited. Peter didn't look at the files immediately. He spent a moment trying to process the first shock. Look. Valerie was probably just stressed, you know? She gets dramatic. Maybe she thought you were drinking after you stormed out. It was probably just an overreaction from her. She was worried. Peter insisted, trying to apply the familiar salve of excuse-making. Stop, I said. Just open the deed, Peter. Tell me what you see. A minute passed. The sounds of his fingers clicking on a keyboard were clearly audible through the phone. Then a long, heavy exhale. Shawn? This signature, is this really yours? He asked, his voice now lower, tinged with disbelief. No, it's a good forgery. But it's not mine. They filed it after they lost the mortgage leverage. They didn't tell me. They were trying to liquidate the house that my money is tied up in without my consent or signature. Peter swore under his breath. A genuine, raw sound of frustration and dawning realization. Jesus, Shawn, if they did this to you, they'll do it to me. I've been putting money into the family trust for years without asking questions. I just always assumed Valerie and Jack wouldn't cross certain lines. Calling authorities on your own kid, forging a legal deed, these are not lines they should cross. That was the crucial moment. Peter had finally stopped trying to smooth things over. He was no longer trying to protect the family unit. He was protecting himself, and by extension me. We were finally aligned in our disbelief. What do you need? He asked. I need a clean exit, Peter. I need to make sure they can't do this again. Not to me, not to Tucker. I can't let them think they can target my custody and then hide behind family guilt. Peter promised to talk to an independent attorney the next day. Someone who wasn't already used by the Marshall family network. He would handle the heavy, legal communication if it came to that. H. Before we hung up, he asked the question I knew was coming. Do you think the call to social services came from Valerie or Jack? I looked down at the report number I had on my desk. H. Waiting for the official name to be attached to the originating phone number. I don't know yet, but I have my guess, Peter sighed. It doesn't matter, does it? H. What matters is they've shown what they're willing to do. When they lose control, they're scared of losing Sophie's support. H. And they're scared of your independence. That night, Tucker slept with his door open. He didn't ask me to. He just did it. H. I stayed up later than usual, sitting in the dark, documenting timelines and consolidating evidence. I didn't send any messages. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't let Valerie know. I knew she had called. They thought they had scared me. They hadn't. H. They had simply clarified the terms of engagement. 2 days later, Jack sent me an email. No greeting, no apology. H. Just an attachment, and a sentence telling me to sign a correction document so the beach house title could be cleaned up. H. He framed it like a minor clerical issue, something minor that needed my cooperation so everyone could move forward. H. The attachment was a revised deed. It kept my name off the title. H. It was a thinly veiled attempt to get me to legally sign away what they had failed to steal. I forwarded the email to Peter. Shh. He replied with one line, "Do not sign anything." I waited until that afternoon. I wanted the timing to be strategic, not emotional. H. Then I replied to Jack. I attached the quitclaim deed they'd already filed, the one with my forged signature. H. I also attached a short note from the legal consultant Peter had connected me with. H. Confirming that the signature did not match my known records and would be treated as a fraudulent filing if pursued. I didn't threaten in the traditional sense. I didn't raise my voice in text. I wrote that I was aware of the filing. H. I wrote that it had been reviewed. H. I wrote that I would not be signing anything to correct a document I never authorized in the first place. Then I gave them the choice, plain and simple. They could withdraw the fraudulent filing, acknowledge the forgery, and agree to an immediate H. documented legal resolution regarding the beach house, a forced sale or a partition. Or, I wrote, H. I can file a police report for forgery and add the false welfare check to it. That was the whole message. No emotional language. H. No accusations beyond what I could prove with documentation. I ended it by saying all future communication should go through counsel. I hit send. The line had been drawn. Now, the family was about to feel the heat of the consequences I had promised. Jack did not reply to the email. Valerie did not reply. The message I had sent, a calm H. Documented ultimatum backed by the threat of police reports, had achieved immediate radio silence from the primary controllers. H. They were stunned. They were calculating their defense. But the emotional link, the designated carrier of the family panic, reacted immediately. Less than an hour after I hit send, Sophie called. I almost didn't answer. Shh. I had promised myself to route all contact through counsel, but I needed to hear it from her. H. I needed to know the depth of the deception. I answered, keeping my voice flat. She didn't start angry. She started panicked. Her voice was high, pitched and shaky. Shawn, what did you do? What did you send Jack? He is furious. Valerie is crying. H, they said you are blowing things up over nothing. You have to stop, she pleaded, rushing the words out. It's not nothing. H. Sophie, I said, you know exactly what it is. It's forgery. It's a crime. That's when the tone changed. The face aid dropped, and the self-serving entitlement emerged. I am in trouble, Shawn. Real trouble, she confessed. H. Her voice dropping to a desperate whisper. I have been juggling credit cards and short-term loans for months. H. The divorce settlement didn't cover what I thought it would, and I promised money I don't actually have. I told people I would have access to the beach house money by summer. H. Either from a sale or rental income. She said it as if that explained everything. Shh. As if her financial mismanagement automatically negated my legal ownership. I needed my name off the house. Jack and Valerie were supposed to handle it quietly. You were never supposed to notice. You don't even use it. H. Shawn. The last sentence was the core of her grievance. The belief that, because I maintained distance and didn't need the asset, I had forfeited my right to it. My independence was her inconvenience. That is not the point, I said, my voice rising slightly for the first time. The point is that they forged my name, Sophie. They broke the law because you promised money that was not yours to promise. She shifted quickly back to emotional manipulation. H. She needed time. She asked me to let them fix it quietly, to avoid the lawyers. She begged me to just sign the correction document Jack had sent. If you just sign the correction, everything will calm down. H, and no one will get hurt, she insisted. No, I said. No, I will not do that. You shouldn't have promised money that wasn't yours. She got angry then. Her voice hardened.
You are choosing pride over family!
You are punishing my kids because you have to be right.
You are overreacting to a stupid piece of paper.
You are overreacting to a debt you incurred. I countered.
H.
This is finished. She hung up, the line cutting off abruptly. The silence that followed felt heavy, final. She had confirmed everything, the plan, the motivation, and the level of legal compromise my parents were willing to accept to protect her. I waited another 10 minutes to ensure she wouldn't call back. Then, I initiated my second strategic move of the day. H. I contacted the property management company that handled the beach house rentals. This company managed the bookings and maintenance. H. Which meant they managed the income flow. I forwarded them the documentation Peter's lawyer had helped me prepare. H. It clearly showed the title was now formally in dispute, that the most recent quit-claim deed was contested due to evidence of forgery, H, and that any agreements relying on my consent were invalid until the matter was resolved. They replied quickly, H, their tone professional and neutral, which was exactly what I wanted. H, they confirmed they would freeze all current and future rental activity immediately and flag the account as legally contested. H, no more income, no more plans. The money tap was shut off. The phone rang again. This time it was Peter. He had just heard from Jack. He is losing it, Peter reported. He accused you of sabotage. Said you were trying to destroy the family. H, said Sophie is beside herself because the beach house was the only thing keeping things afloat.
It's not sabotage,
Peter.
it's consequence.
I corrected him. He committed forgery and called child services. H, I removed their tools. He threatened lawyers. Peter warned. H, remind him the first thing a lawyer asks for is the original deed. Peter. H, and remind him lawyers ask questions about the originating phone number on welfare checks. Peter told me he had already done that. H, he said Jack was shifting. He stopped screaming and started pleading. He needed to know what it would take to make this go away. H. Valerie left a voicemail that night, but I didn't listen until after Tucker was asleep. She was crying, her voice cracking as she spoke. H. She didn't understand why I was doing this. She said families don't solve problems this way. She claimed I was forcing their hand. She never, not once, said I was wrong about the deed or the welfare check. That was all the confirmation I needed. By the next day, the tone shifted again. Fewer accusations, more caution. Jack was asking Peter about timelines for a sale. Not demanding, but asking. The beach house wasn't a symbol anymore. It was an exposure, a problem they needed gone. For the first time since Thanksgiving, they were no longer acting like they were in control. The power had irrevocably shifted. I hadn't raised my voice, but I had made my actions speak louder than any argument. I had leveraged my silence and their crimes to finally create the distance my soul needed. The shift in my parents was palpable. They had moved from anger and threats to cold, transactional fear. They understood they were exposed. They were no longer demanding control. They were asking Peter what it would take to close this chapter. Peter, acting as the perfect firewall, told Jack the only way forward was to resolve the beach house issue cleanly and quickly. That meant selling. But Valerie, unable to accept that she was now powerless, tried one last desperate maneuver to control the family narrative. She went public. It wasn't a direct call. Out of me. She was smarter than that. On a Tuesday morning, she posted one of those long, careful messages on social media. A passive-aggressive essay about family, gratitude, the and how difficult it is when children forget who sacrificed for them. She spoke of values, respect, and loyalty, framing the entire conflict as a moral failing on the part of an unnamed, ungrateful child. She said she was praying for clarity. Crucially, she added photos. Old ones, holidays from years back, group shots of grandchildren around the Thanksgiving table. Sophie's kids were always front and center smiling, messy loved. Tucker, my quiet, deserving son, was absent from every single frame. His existence had been edited out of the family history to support her victim narrative. I forwarded the link to Peter. I didn't comment. The evidence of the emotional warfare spoke for itself. By that afternoon, my phone started lighting up with messages from the extended family. Aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. The flying monkeys were deployed. Some asked what was going on. Some told me I was being unfair. A few, the most passive ones, simply said Valerie was heartbroken and that I should just apologize so everyone could move on. I didn't respond to any of them. I didn't correct the story. I let Valerie's version build, knowing that the greater the height of her moral superiority, the harder and more devastating the fall would be. Peter maintained the same disciplined silence. Valerie posted again that evening. H. Another vague message about teaching gratitude to children and how discipline gets mistaken for cruelty these days. More photos. Still no Tucker. Sophie, playing her role, commented with strings of heart emojis and prayer hands. Jack stayed quiet online. H. But he was busy behind the scenes. Peter told me Jack had called him twice that day, initially angry, then pleading. Ish. Jack said the family was turning on them, that things were getting out of hand. H. Peter calmly reiterated that things were already out of hand when they forged my signature and called social services. The next day, H. A cousin messaged me directly, saying Valerie was telling everyone I was keeping Tucker away to punish her. She claimed I had gone nuclear over discipline and was trying to take money from the family. This was the exact framing she wanted. H. I was the aggressor, destroying the family over a minor slight. Peter and I agreed it was time to end the guessing. H. The parents were relying on the anonymity of their crimes and the public nature of their virtue signaling. We needed to hit them where they were exposed. There was a family group chat, a messy H. sprawling thread that included most of the extended Marshall clan. It had been quiet since Thanksgiving. H. A social graveyard haunted by Valerie's posts. Peter asked if I was ready for him to post something there. Yes, I said. Just the facts, Peter. No commentary. He posted one thing, a single image. It was a screenshot of the official copy of the welfare check report I had requested. H. Not the whole document. Just the top section that listed the originating phone number. Ch. And clearly displayed next to the number was the name associated with the account, Valerie Marshall. The chat went silent. No typing bubbles appeared. No reaction emojis popped up. Nothing. The digital noise of the Marshall family came to an abrupt H. Horrifying halt. 10 minutes later, Peter got a call from Jack. Jack didn't yell this time. He sounded scared. Shh. The full weight of the climax, the potential for legal prosecution and social ruin, had landed. Peter, H. You have to take that screenshot down. People are misinterpreting it. Valerie never meant for it to go that far. Jack's voice was strained, the controlling veneer finally cracking. It had already gone that far, Jack, Peter replied. He kept the screenshot up. Jack tried to pivot again. H. Families don't solve problems in public. You made the problem public when you forged my signature. H. And you made it public when you called the police on your grandson. This is the solution. Peter ended the conversation. That night, Valerie deleted her public posts. The damage, however, was already done. The truth, in the form of a single, verifiable phone number, was now floating among dozens of family members. It erased all her careful framing in an instant. The next day, Jack's tone shifted completely. He stopped accusing. He started negotiating, purely and simply. H. He asked what it would take to close this chapter. H. Peter told him the only path forward was to resolve the beach house issue cleanly and quickly. Does that mean selling? Jack asked. H. Yes, Peter confirmed. Within a week, paperwork started moving, not aggressively, but with careful, almost desperate haste. They priced the beach house to sell quickly. They needed it gone, not just for the money, but for the leverage, which had become a liability. When the sale was initiated, the effect was immediate. The beach house had been their buffer, their fall. Back, the resource they used to keep Sophie afloat. Losing it meant everything tightened. Peter told me Jack admitted they couldn't keep helping Sophie anymore. They had already stretched themselves too far, and the sale proceeds were spoken for, covering other things. Sophie did not take that well. She called Valerie screaming. She called Jack accusing them of ruining everything. She claimed they promised her access, that they told her it was handled. She turned on them fast. According to Peter, she said the whole thing was their fault. If they had just kept control of me, none of this would have happened. She said they had scared me when they should have simply leaned on me. Sophie stopped answering their calls after that. The golden child, once the support stopped, became a hostile, alienated force. The marshals were left alone. Not entirely alone, but the house got quieter. And for the first time since I walked out of their house, I felt a deep, profound sense of relief. They understood the consequences, and they were paying them. The scorched earth was finally settling. The tone shift was complete. The marshals, having been exposed and cornered, were now focused solely on damage control. The beach house went on the market quietly. No announcement, no family email, no final. Bittersweet social media post from Valerie about closing a chapter. It was simply a legal transaction necessary to make their mounting liabilities disappear. The sale moved faster than anyone expected. They priced it to move, and they needed it gone. The urgency was a silent admission of how dire Sophie's underlying crisis had become, and how thin the financial ice the parents were standing on truly was. When the sale closed, the effect was immediate and seismic. The beach house had been more than a property, it was their buffer. It was the psychological mechanism they used to justify endless bailouts for Sophie without touching their retirement accounts. Losing it meant the entire structure of their financial and familial control tightened. Peter handled most of the closing communication. I didn't speak to Jack or Valerie during the process. I didn't need to. The deal was simple: sell the property, split the proceeds owed to each legal owner, and stop trying to play games with the title. When the final paperwork moved, my portion of the sale proceeds hit my account a few days later. Because I was the only child whose name they had initially included on the title. A detail they had later tried to erase. The split was clean. My share and theirs. Peter had never wanted his name on the deed, and Sophie had never put a cent in, only expectations. I didn't celebrate. I didn't buy anything. I didn't tell anyone outside Peter. I immediately set up a protected trust for Tucker. This wasn't the kind of family trust my parents used, which was always a leash. This was something basic, locked down, and impenetrable. It was for Tucker's future. College, a first car, whatever he would eventually need. Crucially, it couldn't be touched by anyone else. And it didn't depend on me being on good terms with anyone. The money was finally clean. Once it moved into that secure account, it stopped being about them entirely. The alienation that followed was swift. Sophie, denied her expected financial rescue, turned on her parents with spectacular rage. Peter heard the worst of it. She started calling them bitter and selfish, accusing them of ruining her life. She claimed they had promised she would be okay, and then pulled the rug out. She was furious that they hadn't been successful in controlling me. She spoke of me like I was a dog that got loose, saying they should have leaned on me instead of scaring me. The irony was heavy. Her entire relationship with her parents was conditional on the cash flow. Once the support stopped, the family loyalty evaporated. Sophie eventually stopped coming around. Her children still wanted to see Valerie and Jack, but Sophie wouldn't bring them. Valerie tried the guilt tactics, the voicemails, the soft complaints. Jack tried to throw blame around, steering the conversation back to fairness and how I was wrong. It didn't work. Sophie was done. Valerie and Jack were left alone. Not fully alone, perhaps. They had neighbors and church friends, people they smiled at in public. But the house got quieter. Peter said Valerie started calling him just to talk about nothing, desperate for connection. Jack would often cut in, trying to steer the conversation back toward money and how things should have gone. Peter was perfect. He didn't fight. He didn't argue. He just kept things short and stopped being available. This was the part I hadn't expected. Peter, the peacekeeper, had stopped trying to bridge the gap. He had seen the true cost of that path, and he had chosen freedom, too. Months went by without any direct contact from my parents. No apology, no acknowledgement of the forgery or the welfare check. No attempt to fix anything without controlling it first. Just silence. Then Tucker's birthday came around. Not a call. Not a text message. Not even a card with a real note. A plain white envelope showed up in my mailbox with Jack's handwriting on it. Inside was a check for a small amount. A symbolic gesture, a test. It was like they were dipping a toe in the water. Seeing if I would break the silence for a number that didn't matter. There was no happy birthday, Tucker. No, we miss you. Just the check and a short line written on a scrap of paper that said something like, tell him we love him. I stared at it for a minute. It wasn't about the money. It was about access. If I cashed it, they'd claim I had accepted them back into the picture, that I had shown a willingness to negotiate. If I didn't cash it, they'd tell people I was keeping Tucker from his grandparents over a birthday gift. I didn't call. I didn't text. I didn't explain. I wrote, "Return to sender," across the front of the envelope and put it back in the mailbox. Tucker never saw it. Life stayed quiet after that. No welfare checks. No weird paperwork. No cousins asking if I hated my parents. No Valerie posts about gratitude. No Jack threats. Nothing. That was the victory. They had finally realized that pushing further would only make things worse for them. They had crossed too many lines, and they knew it. The scorched earth had created the clean, empty space I needed to finally breathe. By the time Thanksgiving rolled around again, a full year after the incident, the prospect of visiting Valerie and Jack was so remote it wasn't even a debate. It was no longer a question of who I was protecting. It was a matter of basic self-respect. H. Tucker didn't ask about going to his grandparents' house. He didn't mention the cheesecake. H. He didn't mention his cousins or the cash envelopes. It was a complete protective erasure. He had settled into the quiet, predictable comfort of our home, and he knew where safety truly resided. Peter called us a week beforehand. His initial plan was to host a neutral Thanksgiving, but he quickly changed his mind. Actually, come to your place, he said. We'll keep it simple. It's better that way. And simple it was. It was just me, Tucker, Peter, Peter's wife, H, and their 2 kids. No big table settings, no forced family photo, no rules about who sat where. We ate in the living room because my dining table wasn't big enough for everyone. Paper plates, normal food, kids talking too loud, adults talking over them sometimes. Nothing was polished. Nothing was tense. It was just loud, imperfect life. Everyone brought something small. Tucker and I handled the cranberry sauce. We made it the exact same way he liked it, from scratch. I let him take the lead, watching him carefully measure the sugar and stir the bubbling pot. He was careful, serious, and focused. He tasted it, added a little more sugar, and looked up at me with the exact same expression of profound pride he'd had the year before. This time, the dish remained on the counter. Nobody knocked it over. We were wrapping up dinner when the moment came. Tucker, carrying the ceramic bowl of sauce to the coffee table, tripped slightly on the edge of the rug. A thick, gelatinous blob of cranberry sauce slid out of the spoon and landed right on the wooden coffee table. He froze, full freeze. His shoulders went up, his eyes wide with fear, and his breathing hitched. In that instant, he wasn't a 9-year-old making a mess. He was a child waiting for the specific, cold-blooded cruelty of Valerie's voice to snap at him. Waiting for someone to decide he didn't earn being there. It was the ghost, the past wound, attacking him in the present. The entire room went quiet. Peter noticed. His wife stopped mid-sentence. We all saw the fear on Tucker's face. I didn't say, It's fine. In that fake, calm voice adults use when they are secretly annoyed. I laughed. A genuine laugh, not at him, but at the absurdity of the situation. I grabbed a paper napkin, scooped the cranberry sauce right off the wooden table, and ate it. Tucker blinked, his wide eyes processing the utter lack of consequence. Then he let out a shaky little breath and smiled. Not a polite, practiced smile, but a real, relieved one. Peter's kid laughed and shouted, "Ew!" And then everyone laughed again. Tucker laughed, too. The fear was gone. No punishment. No lecture. No shaming. No moral lesson about how he should have been more careful. Just a kid making a small mess, and adults acting normal about it. Later, when Peter and his family were bundling up to leave, Peter clapped me on the shoulder. "This," he said, looking at the quiet, peaceful chaos of my living room, "is how it's supposed to feel, Shawn." I knew exactly what he meant. A year ago, my son stood in a house full of people, holding an empty envelope, being told he didn't earn dessert. Today, he was standing in his own home, surrounded by people who didn't measure love with money or control. The mortgage was gone. The deed was clean. The financial leverage, the emotional threats, and the social pressure had all been systematically neutralized. I had realized the truth. Safety wasn't found in isolation, but in the decisive, irrevocable enforcement of boundaries. I hadn't burned down a family. I had burned down the system that used to control me. It was scorched earth, yes, but it was also the foundation for peace. And in the new, quiet space,